Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for investing your time with us.
Thank you indeed. Me, Dr.
On a
Abbas.
Thursday morning.
Join me, bro.
We really appreciate your attendance. My name is Arij. I'm a member of the foundation department at Al-Zahra College. So let's start. Although translation historically dates back centuries, it was only a few decades ago that translation studies was able to stand on its own as an academic discipline. And since it's relatively new and because it's an interdisciplinary field, there are still so many aspects actually to explore for researchers. So today we're thrilled to have in this panel Dr. Al-Manna, who once was our colleague at Al-Zahra College, and now he's an associate professor of translation studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. Apart from teaching and supervising MA and PhD students, Dr. Ali is so devoted to enriching the scientific research in translation studies field. He has notable and outstanding contributions that further help in giving the field its due significance. He has articles published in peer-reviewed journals, and he is the author, editor, and translator of several publications. And these include, but are not limited to, the Routledge course in translation annotation, semantics, translation for translation students, reframing realities through translation. So today's discussion will be about his latest volume entitled Translation as a Set of Frames, which is edited by him, Dr. Al-Manna, and Changwon Gu, who is an assistant professor of translation studies at Liverpool University, UK. The volume has been recently published by the prestigious publisher Routledge in one of its well-known series called Routledge Studies in Language and Identity. It includes 14 cutting-edge articles that exemplify how translation and interpreting might interact with such topics as power, ideological discourse, representation, hegemony, and identity. This volume will help you see translation in its true perspective, actually. It will make you realize that translation is never innocent, but usually ideologically motivated. But before I leave the floor for Dr. Ali, I'd just like to remind our respected audience that the links for the attendance certificates will be shared in the last 10 minutes of the panel. So you just need to share your full details that will include your full name, and the certificates will be automatically generated by the college system. It will be sent to your email. The floor is yours, Dr. Ali. You may proceed with your talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Arij. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Actually, it is my pleasure and honor to be with you today to talk about my latest book published by Routledge, titled Translation as a Set of Frames. But before starting, let me seize this opportunity, this good opportunity, to thank first Dr. Musallam Al-Mani, the Dean of Al-Zahra College for Women, for inviting me to touch on my book. And also, I would like to thank you all for attending, for making this possible. Thank you very much, the attendees, my colleagues, my students. Thank you very much. Actually, your attendance, I have to be honest with you, has taken me to the corners of happiness, to the corners of smiles. You cannot see my heart now, but if you can see, and then you will discover by yourself that my heart is still smiling. Okay, let's get started. Let me share the slides with you. And while we are waiting, just I would like to remind you, so please try to mute yourself, and thank you in advance for your cooperation. Can you see the slides at each?
Yes.
Yes, Doctor.
Yeah. So in this webinar, we're going to have two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the book. Okay, I'm going to introduce the book. I'm going to review on the book, its chapters, contributors, the main ideas expressed in the book, and then I'll move to talk about the idea behind the title, translation as a set of frames. So as can be seen here, we have the cover, we have the title, because we need that title later to build the whole discussion on that title. And also you can see the names of the editors, the logo, the name of the series, Routledge Studies in Language Identity. For those who are interested in getting more information, they can use that link. Otherwise, they can Google the title or my name or just my colleague's name, and then you are going to reach the volume. Let me start with the chapters. We have 14 chapters in addition to the introduction, setting the agenda, translation as a set of frames written by my colleague John Longer from University of Liverpool and B. And chapter 1, titled Interpreters as Key Agents in Reframing Anti-War Power Relations by Elena Bravo and Lanza from Spain. Chapter 2 by our colleague, Professor Said Fayed, titled Framing Translation as Discourse with a capital D and Discourse with a small d. Chapter 3 with our colleagues, I think they are with us today, titled Agency Changes in Manga Translation by Yen Van Ju and Hazira G. Omar from Malaysia. Chapter 4, Translation, Reinforcing or Challenging Hegemony by the Iranian professor Shabnam Sadat from Manchester University. Chapter 5, Translating Nigeria, Reconceptualizing Nigerian Fiction in French Translation or Translations by Professor Aviu Loa. Chapter 6, also about Nigeria, titled Translation, Residence and National Consciousness in the Nigerian Burst Colony by Dr. Francis Ajay. Number 7, by our dear colleague, Dr. Hajar, Assistant Professor of Literature and Linguistics at Al-Zahra College for Women, titled Unbiased Exegetes, Moderate Islamism and the Reframing of Islam and the Muslim World in the Aftermath of September 11, 2001. We have more chapters. Chapter 8, titled Domesticating Saudi Arabia in Use Trans-Editing, Representations and Power Negotiation by Dr. Asma Al-Qaner, Assistant Professor of Translation at Al-Qasim University, Saudi Arabia. Chapter 9, Russia and Vladimir Putin framed on Chinese video sharing platform titled Bilibili, an analysis of strategies or strategic audiovisual narrative by Professor Wang Ru. Chapter 10, Hedging in Interpreted Speech, Cognitive Hedges in English and Hungarian Interpreting by Dr. Andrea Götz. Chapter 11, by my colleague, Dr. Amr Al-Adwan, and also my colleague, Dr. Muhammad Ahmed Thawabta, titled Reframing Arabic Metaphorical Expressions in English Subtitles, the Case of Noam Al-Talat. Chapter 12 by Dr. Musallam Al-Mani, the Dean of Al-Zahra College for Women, and our colleague, our moderate, Ms. Arid Al-Jamai, titled Celestial Bodies, a Case of Reframing Omani Realities Through Translation. Chapter 13 by Professor Jing Gao, the Director of Translation Studies at Durham University, titled Translating Nation in the Late Jing China, the Discourse and Power of Nation in the Remaking Chinese Society. And the last chapter by Dr. Yu Jing, titled Eliza's Two Voices and the Transformation of Women's Identity in China. Actually, I'm not allowed to provide you with a lot of details, but at least I'm trying to do my best to let you get the text of the book. So I have already mentioned that. If you are interested, you can use the link, or just Google my name will be the title of the book, and you will get a lot of information. Okay, now let's move to the second part of the lecture. Let me tell you something about the idea behind the title, Translation as a Set of Frames. Actually, I have had this idea in my mind for many years. I've been working on this idea for many years. And this idea has been published by some of my books, such as Reframing Realities Through Translation, published by the well-known publisher Peter Lang, located in Oxford, 2020. And the co-editor with me, Professor Juan Jose from Spain, in addition to some other articles and webinars conducted recently by me. Now, before starting, we need to be clear about certain terms and issues, such as frame and framing. So what is frame? So what is a frame? What is a framing? What is the difference between these two terms, frame and framing? Actually, let me start with the first term. Let me start with the term frame. Frames can be defined from different perspectives. Can be defined as data structures, reality organizers, structures of expectations, conceptual structures, mental structures. So let me start with the first definition proposed by Minsky, 1974, where he defined frames as data structures for representing situations in life. And you know that life is full of situations. Actually, it is crammed full of situations. So when you apply for a job, this is a situation. When you are fired from your job, this is another situation. When you sit for the exam, when you resit for the same exam, when you pass a course, when you fail a course, when you drop a course, when you visit your friend, when you are visited by your friend, when you feel tired, when you feel off color and you decide to go to your doctor, when you decide to visit your dentist, when you meet your friend over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So you see, we have a lot of situations. So when you find yourself in a particular situation, you need to link your past experience to the current situation, and accordingly, you act, react, behave, and so on and so forth. 1978, another scholar called Touchman defined the the term frame or frames in general as everyday reality organizers. Actually, they organize those situations that we might find ourselves in. So they organize realities in life. In 1993, another scholar called Tenham decided to elaborate on the idea proposed by Minsky, 1974, when he linked the term frame to the notion of expectations. Therefore, he defined frames as structures of expectations. Again, when you find yourself in a particular situation, you need to link, okay, that situation to the past experience, your past experience. And then accordingly, you have to expect that people in such a situation normally act, react, behave in that way. And then it's up to you whether you want to adhere to the social norms and act, react, behave according to those structures of expectations or no. You might act against those or those social norms. It depends on the situation, it depends on your character. Okay? Semantically speaking, frames can be defined as conceptual structures that help language users, whether they are speakers, writers, to identify, to figure out the meaning of the lexical item, the meaning of the word. According to this approach, which is called frame semantics, which is a branch of semantics. Semantics is a branch of linguistics, which is the study of meaning. According to this approach, frame semantics, it is not enough to rely on the dictionary meaning. It is not enough to rely on the denotative meaning, but you need to have a sort of interaction with the meaning. That's why meaning, according to them, is not static, but rather it is dynamic. Why? Because your interpretation, according to your own personal knowledge, according to your own past experience, might be slightly or completely different from my own interpretation. Simply because we are different. People are different in terms of their own linguistic competence, in terms of their own accumulated value system, their own beliefs, assumptions, backgrounds, commitments, whether they are political, religious, they are different in terms of their own sense of belonging. You see, that's why we are different. Therefore, your interpretation might be slightly or completely different from my own interpretation. That's why, according to frame semantics, meaning is dynamic. Approached from a cognitive standpoint, frames can be defined as mental structures that can be used by people as social agents to shape their actions, reactions, behaviors, their way of thinking, their way of dividing people into groups, selfness, otherness, their way of evaluating others. They shape their own goals. They try to achieve their own plans that they make to achieve those goals, their own social policies, along with the institutions established to carry out those social policies. You see, so frames can be defined from different perspectives, but actually they are data structures. They are mental structures, structures of expectations, conceptual structures used by people to act, react, behave in that way rather than another way. Now let's move to define the term framing. So what is framing? Again, what is framing? Actually, framing can be defined as a strategy used by people as social agent living in a particular city, in a particular country, belonging to a particular community, having their own ideologies, their own accumulated value system, their own background, etc. Okay, so it is a strategy used by those people to shape their own actions, reactions, behaviors, their own goals, their own plans, social policies, and so on and so forth. As far as language is concerned, framing can be defined as a strategy. Again, I'm trying to emphasize the word strategy. So it is a strategy used by language users, whether they are speakers, writers, to superimpose certain directionality at the text at hand, to have it meet their own linguistic competence, their own ideologies, their own sense of belonging, and so on and so forth. When we talk about a translation, framing or reframing, sometimes also we call it reframing, can be defined as a strategy. Again, it is a strategy used by translators, interpreters, transeditors to superimpose certain directionality, certain narrativity at the text at hand, to have it meet their own ideologies, their own accumulated value system, their own commitment, their own background, etc. Okay? According to, before that, we need to have another slide, I guess. Yeah. Need to talk about the classification of framings. So according to the narrative theory proposed by Summers and Gibson, 1994, and adopted by Baker, 2006, framings can be classified into three main types. But before talking about those three types, let me just in 1 minute, okay, brief you on the narrative theory. So what is a narrative? Actually, a narrative, according to those scholars, it is a story. So a narrative is a story of a set of events. We talk about events ordered in sequence, whether spatially or temporally. And those events should be linked both coherently and logically. Otherwise, it is difficult for me as a addressee to make sense of your own story. It is difficult to make sense of your own narrative. And there are four types of narratives. Personal narratives, when you talk about your own self. Public narratives, which is attached to a large group of people. Conceptual narrative. Our lecture, our webinar today is an example of conceptual narratives. Okay, and the last one is meta-narrative, also known as master narrative, attached to all people all over the world. A good example to be considered here is coronavirus. These days, all people are fully aware of this story. You see? Now, according to this theory, the narrative theory, framings can be classified into three main types: paratextual framings, contextual framings, and textual framings. In this webinar, I'm going to concentrate on the last type, but I will define the first two in passing. So let's start with the first type, paratextual framings. Actually, here we talk about all those productions surrounding the text. If you remember, when I start my own webinar, I said I'm going to talk about the title as an example of a paratextual element. So we're going to talk about the title, okay, as a production surrounding the 14 chapters as an example of a paratextual element. So paratexts are defined by Gerard Genet in his book titled Paratext, Thresholds of Interpretation 1997 as those productions surrounding the text, thus extending the text in a way that would ensure how it is received and how it is consumed by you as a reader. And paratexts are classified by him into two main types, paratext and epitext. So paratexts refer to paratextual elements attached to the text, such as the title of the book, okay, the author's name, foreword, preface, etc. But sometimes you have other elements which are not attached to the book. For example, our webinar today is an example of a paratextual element which is not attached to the book. So you can translate this webinar and you're going to have an example of translating by paratextual framing or reframing, in particular when you decide to manipulate the text to have it meet your own ideology. So examples of epitext: interviews, advertisements, interviews, book reviews, webinars. So all those productions surrounding the text, but they are not attached to it. Okay? The second type of framings, which is called contextual framings. Actually, here we talk about the relationship between text and the situation. And they are classified into three main types: thematic and episodic framings, temporal and spatial framings, and relational framings. In order to understand those three types, you have to understand the features of narrativity. So what is narrativity? What is narrative? I have already mentioned narrative is a story that you try to tell. It is a product that you try to produce. So narrative, just to remind you, is a story of a set of events ordered in sequence, whether temporally or spatially. And those events should be linked both coherently and logically. What is narrativity? Actually, narrativity is the process. Narrativity for me is the directionality that you superimpose on your own product, on your own story, on your own narrative, on your own text. Yeah, excuse me, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. Yeah, so in order to understand, yeah, Arich, can you take care of that, please? Thank you. So again, in order to understand the types of those contextual framings, you have to understand the features of narrativity. I've already mentioned that narrativity is the directionality, is the process, the directionality that you impose on your own product, on your own narrative, on your own story, on your own text, when we talk about text, okay? And it has four main features: selectivity. When we talk about the act of selecting, you have to select your own events. Okay, you decide to have your own narrative. You decide to have your own story. First, you have to select your own events. Of course, here we talk about the act of including some events, some elements, and excluding others. This is the first feature. the second feature, which is called diachronicity and employment from the term plot. Okay, so when you have already selected your own materials, you have already selected your own events, now you are at the point of order those events. You have to order them in sequence, whether temporally or spatially. Here we talk about the second type of contextual framings, temporal and spatial framing. You have already selected your own events and you have already ordered them. You need to inject them with some morals. Here we talk about the third feature, which is called employment from the term plot. Of course, as a translator, if I decide to reorder those elements, I'm going to reframe realities differently. I'm going to change the text, thus promoting or elaborating, okay, different narratives, you see? And the last one, I call it dependency. So the interpretation of those events selected and ordered by you, okay, rely on the interpretation of other events, whether inside the main story or outside the story, whether it is inside the main narrative or outside the main narrative. That's why we have three types of contextual framings. A good example to be considered here is the coronavirus. So if you decide to talk about coronavirus in its wide context, you're going to have a zoom out picture. Well, if you decide to concentrate on a particular country, you're going to have a zoom in picture. You're going to have a lot of details. You're going to concentrate on one country. You're going to concentrate on one city if you decide to talk about just one city. Therefore, as a translator, when you change that zoom out picture into a zoom in picture, you're going to have an example of, okay, translation by contextual framing. Now let's move to textual framing and my own contribution. Textual framing, also called linguistic framing, refers to the act of superimposing certain directionality, certain narrativity on the text at hand by opting for certain local strategies, such as addition, omission, reordering, and so on and so forth. According to the narrative theory, textual framings are classified into two main types: selective appropriation of linguistic materials and shifting. And the first one is subdivided into two main types: framing by addition and framing by omission, while shifting is subdivided into three types: framing by lexical choices, framing by grammatical choices, and framing by reordering. Actually, this classification of textual framing is of little help. That's why I tried to have my own classification. So, according to the cogno-narrative theory of translation, it is a project that I've been working on for many years. It can be classified into four main types, corresponding to the imaging systems that each and every person has. So you have four imaging systems. I have four imaging systems, and actually the idea of the imaging systems was discussed in details in our book titled The Arabic English Translator as Photographer, published by Routledge with my colleague, Dr. Khalid Shihari of Qatar University. I think he is with us today, thank you. And in that book, published 2019, we developed the idea of the imaging systems and how to translate the images conjured up in your mind when you translate from language A to language B. And actually, framings, according to this theory that I've been working on, are classified into four main types: framing by reconfiguration, framing by redistributing attention, framing by shifting perspectives, and framing by shifting force interactive patterns. In this webinar, I'm going to have some examples to explain the first type only, framed by reconfigurations due to time limitations. So let me speed up, please. So the first imaging system, configurational system, refers to all forms of conceptualizing of quantity or relations between quantities. Here we talk about quantities, the quantities of the action expressed by the verb, or the quantities of the matter expressed by the noun phrases. Okay, in two main dimensions, time and space. So in this imaging system, serious consideration is given to notions and categories such as complexity, state of dividedness, state of boundedness, degree of extension, flow of energy, time lapse, and scene partitioning. So in this is the source. Okay, so it is an article titled Reframing Realities by Reconfiguration Through Translation by me, submitted for publication. I found those types of framing by concentrating on the first imaging system. Okay, you can have a look at it. And then I'm going to discuss some examples just to make it clear what I have in my mind clear. Okay, thank you. As can be observed, we have a lot of types of framings by shifting semantic rules, framing by reorganizing textual materials, framing by profile selection, framing by scene resegmentation, by addition, omission, etc., framing by shifting the state of boundedness, by shifting the state of dividedness, by shifting the flow of energy, and so on and so forth. Let's have some examples. Please have a look at this example. Okay, we have English version and Arabic version because it is difficult to call them the source text and the target text. These two texts were taken from BBC, addressing or talking about the same event. Okay, the International Committee of the Red Cross has helped, please try to highlight the verb, has helped. Okay, look at the Arabic version, أعلنت اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر. Here we have an example of shifting the semantic rules. So in this example, as one may observe, the International Committee of the Red Cross, syntactically speaking, this is a noun phrase, and each noun phrase, any clause in any sentence, should fill, okay, a semantic rule, also known as thematic rule or theta rule. Here in the English version, fills different verb-specific semantic rules. In English, it fills a verb-specific semantic rule of help. So it is actor, more accurately, it is help. That indicates its involvement as an active participant in the process. However, in Arabic, there is no such a reference to such participation, as it fills a verb-specific semantic role of announcer in the process of saying in a verbal process. To borrow terms from Holiday, when he classified processes into 6 processes, I classified them into 8: process of doing, process of having, process of being, process of sensing, process of existing, process of behaving, process of happening, and so on and so forth. Another example. you can have a look at the English version and the Arabic version. Let's concentrate on القوات الحكومية اليمنية المدعومة من السعودية. We talk about only Saudi Arabia here. But in the English version, Yemeni forces backed by a Saudi-led coalition. Here, the noun phrase is characterized by multiplicity when we talk about the quantity of that noun phrase, when we talk about the quantity of the matter expressed by that noun phrase, because we talk about more than one element, we talk about more than one country. But in the Arabic version, we talk about one country. Therefore, it is characterized by what? By unipluxity. Therefore, we have an example of framing by shifting quantities, in addition to some other details. But let me speed up. Here, we are going to discuss the verb to die and the verb to kill. So you see here, one of the workers died. What we have here, we have a process of happening, because by virtue of that verb, we talk about what? We talk about a process of happening that does not require more than one participant. But by virtue of the verb qatala, we talk about a process of doing that requires more than one participant. So therefore, what we have framing by shifting profile selection. In this example, while in the English version, a process of happening expressed by the verb to die is used, in the Arabic version, a process of doing expressed by the verb qatala, that is to say, to kill, is used. It is worth noting that each verb used here has a certain profile in a given semantic frame. The verb to die, to explain, is profiled in a frame where it contrasts with the verb to kill, while the verb to die is characterized by having a monadic personation type. Okay, we have just one person. Okay, it requires it requires only one participant. The verb to kill is characterized by having a deactic personation type. We have two participants. It requires at least two participants, agent and patient, or agent and affecting participant. To elaborate, the verb to die invokes, if you remember frame semantics, so the verb to die invokes in our mind an accident frame which has nothing to do with issues such as the intention to cause to kill. That is to say, a killing frame. Okay? Here we talk about what? Causativity. We talk about the flow of energy from the actor to the patient. Okay? In the Arabic version, as one may observe, by virtue of the lexical item fawran, immediately, the piece of evidence is speed up. This is another issue that can be taken into consideration. Okay? And also we have already mentioned that it is a process of doing that requires two participants. Also, it invokes in our mind, okay, a killing frame, okay, that has something to do with causing death to somebody. The last example that I would like to discuss with you is this. Please have a look at it. So in the English version, the children were traveling on a bus. We don't have that process of doing expressed by the verb to travel in the Arabic version. قتلت غارات جوية شنها التحالف بقيادة السعودية عشرات الأشخاص. Look at here, عشرات الأشخاص بينهم أطفال. But in the English version, the children, we talk about children only. So we have a lot of types of framings. We have framing by scene resegmentation, addition, where the process of doing expressed by the verb to travel was added in the English version or was deleted in the Arabic version. Framing by mystification, okay, where you try to hide the agent, when you try to hide the doer of the action, where the agent, the killer, the hitter, was not mentioned in the English version. We have an example of framing by reorganizing textual materials from an agentless passive construction in English version to an active one in the Arabic version, thus inviting the English text readers to show great empathy with the affected participant, with a more emphasis on the patient, okay? And also we have framing by shifting thematic rules or semantic rules. In the English version, the semantic rule of the affected participant is assigned to children only, while in Arabic, it is assigned to many people, including children. So this is frame and framing, and this is the main idea behind translation as a set of frames. Thank you for listening. Let me stop sharing. Back to you, Ms. Ali. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. That was very interesting. Now, let's see if our audience have any questions. Okay. With 81 participants. Anyone would like to comment on?
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Khalid.
How are you doing? Thank you very much, Shadi. Thanks, Aris. Nice to see you again after such a long time.
Nice to see you too. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Ali, for the brilliant presentation that you made about your book. I'm sorry I cannot share my camera. I mean, see just horrible hair I've got today. Been 2-3 months without cutting. Everything's locked down here. So, yeah, I like the concept of framing. Really, I mean, it's still not clear to me, and probably to some of the attendees, and more I think difficult for students even, how to get that link between, or how to consider framing as a strategy, because you mentioned at some point of your presentation that it's used or can be used as a strategy of translation, and still not clear to me how that can be a strategy. I mean, since when we talk about strategies, and I mean, probably better than me, I mean, in this regard as a theorist, the difference between strategies and techniques and methods and blah, 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 all of those terms that we use, I mean, sometimes exchangeably, I mean, in the course of translation. But usually when we deal with strategies, we deal with something like as a whole strategy that we use for the whole text, probably, or the whole task of translation. That could be one of the definitions of strategy. So how we link that with framing? I mean, how framing can be, because I haven't seen this as in any of the books before, probably with my little poor reading. I haven't seen it mentioned as a strategy, unless this is something new we can consider it as a strategy, starting with your book here, Dr. Ali. So can you just explain that further? I mean, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid, first for your attending. And I have already mentioned that Dr. Khalid is Professor of Translation Studies at Qatar University, and he was Professor of Translation Studies at Sultan Qaboos University, and we worked together on the book titled The Arabic English Translated Photographer, published by the same publisher, Routledge. Thank you for your question, Dr. Khalid. Actually, first we need to distinguish between local strategies and global strategies. Global strategies, the strategy adopted by you as a translator before embarking on the act of translating, you have to take into consideration a lot of factors, such as the text type, readership, purpose of translation, and then you decide whether you are going to, again, we have a lot of terms, whether you are going to have reader-oriented, you're trying to live up to the target language readers' expectations, or no, you are going to have a translation which is very close to the source text or something in between. This is before you start, which is called a global strategy. And then when you start translating, okay, and in particular when you face a problem, or when you are motivated by your own ideology, by your own accumulated value system, your own sense of belonging, you might opt for a local strategy. Okay, so according to Vani and Davenant, we have 7 strategies. According to Peter Newmark, we have a lot of local strategies. Okay, so instead of calling them strategies, in particular when we talk about political text, we can't call them a framing, because if you remember the definition of framing, actually it is a strategy adopted by you as a social agent, adopted by you as a language user, adopted by you as a translator, interpreter, to what? To manipulate the text, either on purpose, okay, when I mean, you are motivated by your own ideology, so it is on purpose, or sometimes by accident, due to your own linguistic competence, which is part of your own translation competence. This is my own understanding to that, let's say, that sentence. Therefore, according to my own linguistic competence, according to my own translation competence, I'm going to put the text in that way. So if you are going to put that text in that way, okay, we might have an example of what? Example of reframing, and we have a lot of types. Actually, it has been mentioned by scholars before me, but they classified it in one of the strategies, which is called selective appropriation of linguistic materials. When you select a particular lexical item, you have a lot of lexical items, die or kill. It depends on your own ideology. You might go for what? Qatal. You might go for istashhada. You might go for tawaffa, and so on and so forth. So there are strategies actually, but the new classification, yes, it is mine in the project that I've been working on, titled A Cognitive Narrative Theory of Translation, where I'm trying to merge the narrative theory and cognitive linguistics, more accurately, the imaging systems. That's why I have a lot of types of framings. Thank you very much for your question. Back to you.
Is Dr. Musallam there? Because it would be a good idea if other speakers as well, talk about their contributions to the book. Just wonder if any of the speakers there, just to give us like...
Yes, I think I've seen Arij is there, and I haven't seen Dr. Hajar. I've seen Dr.
Because this is going to be like a launch of a new book, actually, so it's worth it if we can hear from...
Yeah, it might be a good idea to invite actually the contributors in a different panel,
I do agree with you.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. By the way, we have Dr. Fan from Malaysia, and also her colleague I've seen, and some other contributors who decided to attend this webinar. Thank you. But it is a good idea to invite them, whether by your own college or other institutions, to talk about
what I find interesting in this book, actually having voices from different places of the world, which really represent the global identity of translation, at the same time bringing diversity from different cultures, different societies. So the examples I expect, the book that I mentioned in the book will be more and more representative of the global voice, if you can say, of translation. That's again another something stunning point here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to ask a question about your explanation, Dr. Ali, of reframing. So can we say there are any similarities between reframing and rewriting?
Yes, actually,
Are there overlaps?
Yeah, rewriting is part of reframing. So what is reframing? Actually, we don't translate.
Yeah.
The whole idea is that we don't translate, we don't transfer, we don't represent, but rather we don't produce, but rather we reproduce.
Yes.
We rewrite, we reframe, okay, our stories, our personal knowledge, and so on and so on. That's why we started talking about rewriting. I think your chapter with Dr. Musallam, and also we have reproducing knowledge instead of representing knowledge. Okay, so we have a lot of examples, but it depends on the scholar, it depends on the writer, how to, for example, for me, narrativity, I didn't mention that, narrativity in the project that I've been working on can be classified into two main types. Narrativity by internal framing, which is something recommended. We encourage people to take into consideration the differences between the interfacing languages, the interfacing cultures. I call it because you are going to superimpose certain directionality, certain narrativity at the text at hand. But the main reason is that you have taken into consideration is what the difference is. The second type, which is called by me narrativity by external framing, which can be sub-classified into two main types: by accident, due to your own linguistic competence, due to your own translation competence, when you fail to understand the source text, when you fail to be an insider in the source language culture, or when you fail to encode what you have already understood in the target culture, when you fail to be an insider in the target culture. You see, so we have all these details, but it seems that I need a lot of time to put this volume to bed. That's why I decided to work on it, carry on working on that volume. Thank you.
So maybe to make it simple, it's like we have two ways. Maybe sometimes it's like there are agenda, and sometimes no, there are not, according to what you said. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But sometimes I do agree with you, Arij. Sometimes you change the text. We have an example of manipulation, but actually we cannot say it is because of the translator's ideology. We are not sure. Maybe because of what? Because of the translator's linguistic competence, translation competence. In particular, when we ask our students,
of course.
When we ask our students to translate a text, they change it.
Of course.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah. Yes, anyone else? Dr. Qasim Abbas is raising a hand.
Yes, thank you. May I participate?
Yes, of course.
Well, thank you for Dr. Al-Manna for giving us this chance to. Though I joined the webinar late, I have one question. Where does Dr. Al-Manna locate the translation frames concerning the nowadays the trend in criticality and the critical discourse analysis and critical stylistics? How can he view critical translation? How can he approach this this field, this subfield, according to the translation theories? Thank you for giving me this chance.
Thank you, Dr. Qasim. Thank you very much. Can you please introduce yourself, Dr. Qasim, your university?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. I'm Dr. Professor Qasim Abbas Daif, University of Babylon, College of Education for Human Sciences, Department of English. The PhD from University of Mustansiriya, College of Arts, Translation Department.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Qasim. It is my pleasure. to have you here. Actually, yes, it is. I mean, these days also, even the cognitive linguistics can be used as an approach to critically analyze text. Okay, so when we talk about critical discourse analysis, we talk about power relations. Okay, that's why this theory, the narrative theory and the framing theory and the cogno-narrative theory are important contributions to that field. But normally we work on two languages, we work on two different cultures. In your case, I think, but not your own case, I mean those people, because you are part of the field, but other people who are interested just in discourse analysis or just the critical discourse analysis, they can use all these theories, but by analyzing only one text. But for us, no, we have to take into consideration the two cultures, the two languages into consideration. Yes, it is, I mean, when you talk about power relations, and then you have to adopt one of the approaches in the critical discourse analysis. One of these approaches is the narrative theory in translation studies proposed by Somers and Gibson. Why? Because we found that it is difficult just to concentrate on the linguistic elements. So we decided to go beyond the linguistic elements. Therefore, we started talking about the ideology, the power relations, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see that Mustafa Al-Hassan.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
So,
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Ali for this nice presentation. My question is that in cognitive linguistics, there are different concepts that are used to represent how human experience are stored or how a human experience is conceptualized. Like, for example, Lakoff uses the term domain, Lakoff and Langacker. The same thing, Fauconnier uses the term mental space, as well as Fillmore uses the term frame. So I would like to see what is the difference between these three concepts.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. I think from Al-Zahra University in Iraq, because we met one day in one of the webinars.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Actually, I'm very much interested in terms, classifications, the imaging systems. Okay, when we talk about the mental image and the configurational system and the attentional system. Why? Because as a researcher, in particular, somebody who's interested in translation, I found that model provide me with a lot of details. I can have lectures just to explain one example, you see. But other terms, yes, sometimes we talk about the same idea by using different terms. Even in translation studies, we talk about local strategies, which are classified differently by different people, but normally we talk about the same idea, the same issue. You see, now when you talk about, let's say, semantic rules, you normally have that classification in the literature. You have actor, agent, experiencer, but I have my own classification, and I have the right to provide the reader with my own classification based on the verb itself. Why? Because when I start teaching and I start talking about the semantic rules, and some students found it difficult to understand this theory. Therefore, I changed everything accordingly, and then I started having my own classification according to the verb. So I have a verb-specific semantic rule. To be honest, cognitive linguistics is, although I'm interested in, but it is not my area. But I have spent a lot of time reading through some models And 2 years ago, I found that the model proposed by Talmi is more practical for me. So therefore, I try to adhere to those terms. Even my own classification now, when I classified textual framings, I said those 4 types corresponding to the imaging systems. Okay?
Excuse me, Dr. Ali, can you repeat the name again?
Talmi. Yeah, Talmi. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I mean, if you are interested, and if we have time, I can provide you with an example, and then I can explain the whole theory in just 2 or 3 minutes. For example, Dr. Mustafa, if you said, I've already used that term, I've already used these 2 sentences, sorry. كنت أشاهد التلفاز عندما كنت صغيرا, and كنت أشاهد التلفاز عندما جاء صديقي ليزورني البارحة. We have the same grammatical form. We have the same content specification when we concentrate on the first part, كنت أشاهد التلفاز. But for me, the context is different. If I concentrate on the tense is different. Even my own translation should be different. You see, when we talk about the act of watching in the first example, كنت أشاهد التلفاز عندما كنت صغيرا, the act of watching in the process of behaving is drawn out over a period of time. Here, we don't talk about minutes, we don't talk about hours, but rather we talk about years. Okay? In addition to, therefore, it is what we have the first category and the first imaging system, which is called degree of extension. Okay? Also, the act of watching in the first example, كنت أشاهد التلفاز عندما كنت صغيرا, is characterized by having breaks and interruptions. You watch and then you take a break. You watch the following day and you take break. Therefore, we don't talk about one act of watching, but we talk about a series of acts. As such, the act of watching in the first example is characterized by multiplicity. This is one of the categories, one of the notions in the first imaging system. Okay, as long as you have breaks, here we talk about the state of dividedness, another notion, you see? So by using those mental images, you can understand the text and also you can evaluate your own translation. Therefore, you cannot translate كنت أشاهد التلفاز without taking into consideration the context into I was watching TV. Wrong. Why? Because you have change. Yes, I was watching TV. The act of watching is drawn out over a period of time, but we talk about minutes, we talk about hours, and the act of watching in your own translation is not characterized by multiplicity when we talk about the quantity, but it is characterized by uniplexity. We talk about one element, which is characterized by having no breaks, just you watch. عندما وصل صديقي. So and so on. We have a lot of details, and I have to admit that I'm not familiar with all information in all fields, but I'm trying to do my best. When I need something, I normally spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of energy just to understand and then use it in my, even tenses for me in Arabic are classified differently. I don't classify tenses according to this theory. I don't classify tenses into past, present, future. No. I don't classify tenses in Arabic into perfect and imperfect. No. I classify them into morphological tense, زمن الصيغة, or الزمن الصرفي, morphological tense, structural tense, زمن التركيب, and contextual tense, زمن السياق. For you as a translator, you have to do your best to figure out the contextual tense rather than adhering to the morphological tense or the structural tense. If you want to translate accurately, if you want to create a similar mental image in the mind of the target language reader. So I have that classification in the same project titled A Cogno-Narrative Theory of Translation, based on the first imaging system, which is called the configurational system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. That was very clear. Thaer has a question.
Yes, thank you, Arij. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for the well-informative talk. I just have one question, and you were talking about the narrative theory and the narrativity in reframing and retelling stories based on the ideologies of translators. My question is, does this apply to machine translation, or do we consider it a neutral component compared to human translation?
I think a good question. Thank you very much, my friend, my close friend, Mr. Thaer. I miss you. A good question, to be honest with you. I think, according to the narrative theory proposed by Somers and Gibson, developed by Baker and a lot of people, it has nothing to do with ideologies. When we insert a text and we ask the machine to translate, okay? But we have a lot of mistakes. We have a lot of examples of manipulations. That's why in my own project called A Cogno-Narrative Theory of Translation, I've taken this into consideration. When I classified narrativity, and this is my own classification, okay, something new. Narrativity is classified, I have already mentioned that, but I will repeat, into two main types. Narrativity by internal framing, which is something recommended. We encourage you to take into consideration the differences between languages. Therefore, you might start with that clause instead of the second clause. It's okay, as long as you don't manipulate the text, as long as you don't promote a particular narrative, okay? And also we have the second type, which is called narrativity by external framing, which can be classified into two main types. By accident, due to your own linguistic competence, due to your own translation competence. Here we can discuss machine translations. Why? Because sometimes you ask the machine to translate a text and it suggested something which is not accurate. According to that theory, as far as I know, we cannot discuss it, but according to my own approach, you can discuss it under that type. And the second type, which is called on purpose, here, on purpose, when you are motivated by your own ideology. If you translate a text these days from English into Arabic and they talk about the events in Palestine, and then you might go for استشهد. Okay, استشهد الفلسطينيون. Why you go for that? Because of your own ideology, because of your own commitment, because of your own sense of belonging. But if I give the same text to somebody else with a completely different ideology, he or she might go for قتل. Okay? لقي حتفه. لقي مصرعه. You see, so we talk about the same act. We talk about the act of dying. Okay, we talk about the process, but either on purpose or by accident. I think this classification, my own classification, yes, we can accommodate the translation. I'm working on a piece of research with my colleague, Dr. Rafiq, about translating tenses from Arabic into English by using 4 different machines, Google Translate, Systram, Reverso, and the third one I cannot remember. And we discovered that the machine translation machines can work with tenses apart from perfect tenses. Why? Because of the memory, So we can consider that it is a type of narrativity according to my own idea, but by accident rather than on purpose. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Alia Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum all. I'm a senior translator Alia Ahmed from University of Technology, Iraq, Baghdad, and already graduated from Swansea University. I just want to ask Dr. Ali about the difference between frame analysis and discourse analysis, and which approach is better to be used in translation.
Thank you, Dr. Alia. Actually, discourse analysis is, I think, is a wide area. You can analyze any text by adopting different approaches. One of those approaches is pragmatics. So you can adopt a pragmatic approach to analyze your own discourse. But framing is part of, let's say, discourse analysis. Is that clear?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so can we combine?
It is part, so therefore you cannot combine.
It is part.
Yes, of course, you have the right as a writer, it is part, but as a writer, as a scholar, as a researcher, you have the right in your own studies to combine two approaches. Let's say in this study, I'm going to use two theoretical frameworks, namely, let's say, frame analysis and let's say pragmatic analysis. Yes, you have the right, but you have to justify.
To justify, okay.
You have to, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. We have Abdullah Al-Birmani. Yes, Abdullah.
Thank you for giving me the chance for the thread, Dr. Ali. And my asking here, what's the pragmatic and literary translation? What's the pragmatic and literary translation?
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. Actually, I couldn't hear your question in good way, but I think you are talking about the pragmatic approach to translation. Is that correct?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so a pragmatic approach, and then you can use theories from pragmatics. And I think you know that pragmatics is a branch of linguistics when we concentrate on what is behind the meaning. When I say it is hot, so there is no need to concentrate on the denotative meaning of each word, but rather, what do you mean by it's hot? Shall I leave? Shall I turn on the AC? So this is a pragmatic meaning, and we have a lot of theories in this area, such as speech act theory, implicature, politeness theory. So you need, as a researcher, as a writer, as a speaker, you need to adopt one or two, depending on your circumstances and your start with translating. A good example, I do remember, also I'm working on a piece of research on translations submitted to me by my dear students at Al-Zahra College for Women last year, 18 students and also 18 students from Basra University. And in one of those examples in which I try to discuss the culture-specific terms, I do remember, not exactly, but let me try. ما إن رأى الرجال الفتاة قادمة حتى قال أحدهم يا أرض احفظي ما عليك وقال ثان ما شاء الله. أو repeat حتى قال أحدهم يا أرض احفظي ما عليك وقال ثان ما شاء الله. Now, how would you translate this culture-specific term, Ya Ard Ahfadi? Actually, you can adopt a pragmatic approach. You can go for wow. You see, you just go for wow. So it is what you take into consideration the function. You take into consideration the situation. You imagine, if you remember the definition of the frames as data structure, you imagine that in that situation, people normally act, react, behave, or say that. So this is a pragmatic approach. We have a lot of details. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdullah. Ibrahim?
Thank you, Arij. Thank you, Dr. Ali. You put us with different meanings of framing. From accounting viewpoint, usually we use, as you know, sometimes accounting as language. We teach students accounting is a language of business. And
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Ibrahim. Sorry to interrupt you. I know you very well, and thank you, and I miss you, to be honest with you. But can you introduce yourself to the audience, because not all of them from Al-Zahra. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Yules from Zahra College, Department of Managerial and Financial Sciences. My point, just we use sometimes financial statement translation. Actually, when we teach our students, we don't mean that we translate from English to Arabic or not. Usually translate from currency to another currency. In which type of frame usually, as you explained?
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Actually, this is the question is above my head, but I will do my best. Actually, this reminds me of a classification of translation proposed by Roman Jakobson, 1959. When he classified the translation into three main types. Okay, the translation between languages, when you translate from Arabic into English, when you translate from French to Spanish. And also we have another type of translation when we translate within the same language. When I say, for example, something in Arabic is da'wa aba, and then you didn't get my message and you say sorry, and then I might clarify, I might change my own message by using the standard Arabic or whatever. So this is an example of what translating within the same language, but using another level of formality, translating a dialect into another. And the third type, I think, which is related to your own question, which is called anti-Semitic translation. When you translate non-verbal elements into verbal elements. So when you drive your car and the lights turn red, and then you might interpret the color red is what is a stop, and then you decide to stop and wait. So this is called what? This is called anti-Semitic translation. I think in your case, when you have, let's say, a diagram, and then you ask the students to please try to interpret that diagram, that table, by using language. Is that correct? Or you are talking about something else?
No, we translate meaning from real to dollar, or the opposite. And it's common in our literature, they call it financial statement translation.
I see, yeah.
But for example, McDonald's is in Oman. They have branch. When they have to make consolidated financial statement, they have translated.
Yes, yes, this is a good example. Thank you.
Thank you.
I like the example, to be honest with you. I might put it in my mind for the future. Yes, actually here you don't just translate the language, but rather you translate more than the language. You translate the value.
Yes.
You have to take into consideration the differences between, even sometimes when we talk about translation, we talk about translating emotions. And the best approach to be adopted when you talk about emotions is the Appraisal Framework proposed by Martin and White 2005. And this is a good example, Dr. Ibrahim, thank you. Actually here, you don't translate just the language, but you have to Google in order to find the the value of the, let's say, US dollar, and then you transfer into, let's say, yen or whatever. The same holds true when we talk about our webinar, when I said it will be at 11 Omani time. And people have to translate Omani time into, let's say, Qatari time, London time, Malaysian time, and so on and so forth. They have to Google. Thank you very much. A good question.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. We have Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed.
الو السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
شو اخبارك دكتور علي؟
أهلا Dr. Mohammed. Nice to meet you. Can you introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Dr. Mohammed, okay, this is Dr. Mohammed H. Al-Akkad, Mohammed Hamid Al-Akkad. I'm a Palestinian living in Malaysia, working in the Management and Science University, Malaysia. I am managing the program of translation and interpretation. Okay, Dr. Ali, I have a question here, like in terms of annotation, if we are going to annotate, for example, the translation of some or certain religious text, for example, the word of Allah, if we are going to translate it into English as God. We have some debates here in Malaysia about this one. I'm not sure if you heard about it or not. The translation of the word Allah into God. Some of the Malaysian, they refuse it and they call it a kind of degradation for Allah. You can't call Allah as God, because a God has a kind of some certain traits in the minds of non-Muslim which relate to Jesus, or which relate in the Hinduism believes they relate to their own God.
Allah or God? God, yeah?
God, yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Actually, again, you have to take into consideration your readership. If you are translating to those people who do they believe in that, other group of people. So again, you have to take into consideration a lot of issues such as readership, purpose of translation. And I have another example that we can build off. Actually, the word client in English, okay, I'll repeat because I heard something. The word client in Iraq, we don't encourage people to translate this word into amil. Why? Because it has a political connotation.
Yes.
Therefore, we go for what? Zaboon or whatever. But when I moved to other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar here, they don't have any problem with the word amil. Therefore, as a person, as a translator, I don't have any problem with the word amil these days. You see? So the same holds true when you decide to translate the word Allah or God. Okay? The word God, semantically speaking, is wider and less specific because it refers to a lot of reference. But the word Allah, no. You see here? It invokes in the reader's mind the Islam frame.
Yes,
and
yes,
they
exactly.
know, yeah. And so it is not a big issue, I think. You have to take into consideration whether they want you to translate, and you translate Allah or God. I normally use both. It depends on the readership. Okay, it depends on my own global strategy, having taken into consideration all those translation brief, we call them, text type, genre, purpose of translation, etc. And what is your own translation? Is it reader-oriented? Go for God better. If it is no, you have something else in your own mind, go for Allah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali.
Yeah. In terms, just let me add something, if you allow me, Ms. Arij. You mentioned that annotation. I would like just to seize this opportunity to mention something related to annotation. Actually, I think you are familiar that I'm the author of the book titled The Routledge Course in Translation Annotation. Therefore, I would like to seize this opportunity to encourage people, to encourage their own students to adopt a theoretical framework when they start annotating. So instead of annotating, instead of commenting on your own, let's say, problems from different perspectives, no, try to narrow down your own topic. And this piece of research, I'm going to annotate. Okay, I have translated a text, but I'm going to annotate by adopting this module or these two modules better. And you're going to have what? You're going to have literature review. You might have a research question.
Yes.
So we encourage people to do it in this way rather than the other way in which you just talk about your own problems that you have already faced while translating. Okay, thank you.
So it's more systematic. Yes, thank you, Doctor. Sarah, Ahmed?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm really appreciated for this opportunity to talk about you and Dr. Ali. So I'm a student, third stage from Basra University, Department of Translation. So there's something I couldn't understand it about the strategy of foreignization and domestication. So can you please, Dr. Ali, clarify these strategies in our studies?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
And the best way to use these strategies within a text to reach a complete idea or a complete translation. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Ali.
Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, from my city, Basra.
Thank you too. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm from Iraq because I've
Yes,
been
I
asked.
know.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
but others, sometimes they keep asking me. I'm from Iraq, from Basra. Yeah, so your question, back to your question, what is the difference between domestication and actually these two terms coined by the well-known scholar Lawrence Venuti, building on an idea proposed by Schleiermacher in 19th century. Excuse me. Can you mute yourself, please?
Can you please mute yourself?
هالدعاية دكتور علي.
No, her dad, I guess, asked her.
Yes.
Why are you using the mobile? And she said, I'm attending a lecture.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you. So the main idea proposed by Schleiermacher in 19th century when he said you have two options. Either, listen to that, either you leave the reader alone and you bring the author to him or to her. Or the other way around, you leave the text and the author alone and you bring the reader to him or her. You see? So this is the idea. Again, it is, you cannot decide, by the way, without taking into consideration the translation brief. It is very important, okay, to take into consideration the translation brief. What is a translation brief? Translation brief covers a lot of factors that should be given a front seat, such as text type. What is a text type? Are you translating, let's say, a legislative text? If you are translating a legislative text, I'm not saying a legal text because a legal text can be classified differently, but I'm talking about a legislative text. And then you have to leave the text and the author alone and you bring the reader to them. But if you are translating, let's say, a short story, and you have that sort of flexibility to add, okay, to take into consideration the differences between the two languages, the two cultures, okay? You can have an example of narrativity by internal framing, okay? So here you have that flexibility to add, delete, reorder. In other words, you are going to leave the reader alone and bring the author and the text, okay, to him or her. In other words, it is a translation I call a reader-oriented translation when you try to live up to the target language reader's expectations, or the other way around, I call it a text author / author oriented, when you try to be very close to the source text. Of course, look at the relationship between the source text and the target text, where we discuss these two types. If it is domestication, if it is reader-oriented, if it is you decided to leave the reader alone and you bring the text to him or her, the relationship between the source text and the target text will be weak. Okay, why? Because you have that sort of flexibility to add. Again, it is not up to you. It is up to the circumstances of the translation. If you're a teacher, you have to take into consideration as one of the, let's say, elements of translation brief. Sometimes as students, you have to take into consideration your own teacher. My teacher prefers that type of translation. He doesn't like me to add. He doesn't like me to reorder. Okay, I have to add. But another teacher, no, he has or she has no problem with having a comma after yesterday if you start your sentence with yes or no. They don't have any problem with putting yesterday at the beginning or at the end, you see? So you have to take into consideration even your own teacher as one of the elements that should be given a front seat when you discuss your global strategy before starting your own translation. When you start, sometimes you face a problem. Let's say a culture-specific item. You decided to go for, let's say, a text author-oriented. You decided from the beginning that I'm going to strike a balance between a reader-oriented translation and a text author-oriented translation. And then you come to the expression, Ya ard, ahfadhi ma alayki. And then you change your own what? Your own mind, and you go for what? Wow. So wow is what? A reader-oriented translation. Okay? So this is the whole idea. So it is not up to you again and again, but it's up to you, the translation brief. Is that clear, Sarah?
Yes, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, too. Thank you.
I think Dr. Sameh has a question.
I guess from Egypt, Dr. Sameh.
He was raising a hand, but now I can't see his name. Okay, anyone would like to add anything? Any questions to Dr. Ali?
I have a question, please.
Yes, go on.
Yes, hello, Dr. Ali. I am Beida, a junior student in a translation department in Al-Basra University. Actually, I followed you, Doctor, from a while, and for that, I want to say sorry for your dad pass away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for this presentation. I have two questions, actually. One of them is about literary translation. The question is, do I tie up by the words in the source text, or can I express the idea by whatever words I see fit? And the second question...
No, just let me concentrate on this question, and then we move to the second question. Otherwise, I cannot remember.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Beida, for joining us. Again, Beida from Basra, my city. Actually, again, it seems that we talk about your own global strategy. What is your own global strategy? Again, Beida, You have to know that it is not up to you, but it's up to the publisher sometimes. It's up to the teacher if it is assignment. It's up to translation brief again. So if you want to translate, let's say, a collection of short stories or a novel for the purpose of publication, so you need to have a look at the, you need to have a word with the publisher. What do they prefer? In addition to that, also you have to take into consideration whether you are going to have the source text in a bilingual version. If you have seen my own translations, modern Arabic short stories, Moroccan short stories, and the last one, modern Arabic short stories, I have the source text and the target text, okay, in a bilingual. Therefore, I have to strike a balance between a reader-oriented translation and text author. Why? Because I have a type of readers who are going to evaluate, okay, who are going to evaluate for many different purposes, okay, just to learn how to translate, just to evaluate as a researcher, and so on and so forth. But if you don't have the source text in your own edition, and then personally, I encourage you to take into consideration what the stylistic and linguistic and stylistic norms of the target language. If you translate into Arabic, you have to take into consideration collocation. You have to take into consideration the expectations of the target language reader, and so on and so forth. Why? Because your own readers, okay, will not have access to the source text unless they have a piece of research, and they have to spend a lot of time. So you have that sort of flexibility for two main reasons. First, the text type. Second, the purpose of translation, which is called a scopus. Okay, when we borrow terms from scopus theory. Is that clear, Beida?
Yes, clear, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. Now move to your own second question with permission of our moderator. Yeah.
Okay, my second question is, when we translate tenses, actually as the Arabic, our mother tongue, we can translate easily from English into Arabic the past tense and its aspects into the perfect in the Arabic. But the opposite, when we translate from Arabic into English, I don't know when we use the aspect of the past tense in English, just like the perfect and perfect continuous and etc.
Ms. Arij, do we have time to spend 2 minutes?
Yes, of course.
Sorry. Beida, I'm trying to write 2 sentences just to make what I have in my mind clear, because I do know that what happened. So we have 3 sentences. Can you see, please?
Yes, Doctor.
Yeah, with the same grammatical form. لم يتسلم والدي. لم يتسلم والدي. لم يتسلم والدي. Therefore, I have already mentioned that it is not enough to rely on the classification of tenses in Arabic, whether they are simple, past, present, or future. It is not enough to rely on that classification, whether they are perfect or imperfect. You see? Why? Because you are not going to translate accurately. In particular, when we translate from Arabic into English. When we translate from English into Arabic, we don't have any problem. Why do we have that problem? Actually, we have this problem because in Arabic, we have a grammatical category of tense, but we don't have a grammatical category for aspect. But in English, they have those two grammatical categories, tense and aspect. Altogether, they have 12 combinations of tense and aspect. In order to translate, to cut a long story short, you have to follow this classification, my own classification. I have already submitted a paper to a journal, and I will share it when it is published, okay? In which I classify tenses into three main types. Morphological tenses, زمن الصيغة أو الزمن الصرفي, morphological tense, structural tense, زمن التركيب, and contextual tense, زمن السياق. Let's start with the first sentence. لم يتسلم. Let's concentrate on يتسلم. What is the morphological tense? Let's concentrate on the form of the verb. Is it يتسلم or تسلم? Actually, it is يتسلم. Therefore, the morphological tense is present. Why? Because we concentrate on the morphological form. What about the second sentence? Also, we have يتسلم, present. The third sentence, يتسلم, present. Doesn't help. Let's move to the second type of tenses according to my own classification. Structural tense, زمن التركيب. لم يتسلم. By virtue of لم, the tense is past. You see? What about the second sentence, لم يتسلم, past? What about the third sentence, لم يتسلم, past? Doesn't help. So what is the solution then? The solution, you need to figure out the contextual tense by relying on the imaging systems, in particular the first imaging system. Look at the first sentence. Now let's identify together the contextual tense. لم يتسلم والدي راتبه أمس. By virtue of the word أمس, the emphasis is placed on the completion of the act of not receiving his salary. Therefore, and in the second step, we have two steps. The first step, you have to identify the contextual tense, and then the second step, you activate the mechanism of equivalent search. What do we have? Actually, you see here, this, it is equivalent to the past tense. Therefore, when you translate into what? My father didn't receive his salary. Now let's move to the second sentence. لم يتسلم والدي راتبه لغاية أمس. By virtue of this phrase لغاية أمس, we don't talk about yesterday. Listen to this. We don't talk about yesterday, but rather we talk about the whole period that started in the past, unspecified, you see? But is seen as relevant to another point in the past specified yesterday. As long as we talk about period, now mechanism of equivalent search, we go for what? Past perfect. To reflect a similar mental image. لم يتسلم والدي راتبه لغاية أمس. My father hadn't received his salary till yesterday. You can put till yesterday at the beginning. Till yesterday, my father hadn't. When you translate, my father didn't receive his salary till yesterday, you are going to change the mental image. Okay, why? Because the act of not receiving in the second sentence is drawn out as long as you talk about a period. Okay, it is characterized by having boundaries, partial boundaries, because we are able to identify the left hand boundary yesterday, but we are not able to identify the right hand boundary. You see? Now let's move quickly to the third sentence. لم يتسلم والدي راتبه قط. By virtue of قط, again, we talk about the whole period that started in the past and it's irrelevant to another point in the present. And the present mechanism of equivalent search, We have what? We have present perfect. My father hasn't received his salary. There is no need to translate qattu. You can use never. You can use never ever. By doing so, your own translation. So you need to understand, I have some lectures in Arabic and in English on my own channel on YouTube. So you can listen to have a lot of examples. And I have already explained this idea in Arabic and also in English. Thank you, Baida. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali, for the example. Anyone has a question to Dr. Ali? Anyone would like to say something? So shall we end
Thank you.
our meeting? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. That was very interesting and useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arij, and also let me finish off my own webinar by thanking you, the Ms. Arij, for moderating this webinar. I would like to thank all the attendees for making this possible. Also, I would like to thank my colleagues. I've seen Ms. Khawla Al-Azawi, I've seen Ms. Phillips, I've seen Mr. Thair and Ms. Indu and some other colleagues. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm leaving.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Doc. Mrs.
Good
Phillips
afternoon.
here.
Thank
How
you.
are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Doc. And great presentation.
Agree.
Thanks for the great presentation.
Okay, he left actually.
He left.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. You're going to receive the link. You just add your personal information that will include your name, and you will receive your certificate by your email. Okay, thank you. Bye. See you next time.